The crystal champagne flutes clinked in celebration of her promotion, a sound that should have been music to Daniel's ears, yet it rang with a hollow dissonance. Across the candlelit table of the high-end Manhattan restaurant, he caught the way Olivia's eyes lingered on her boss, Adrian, a gaze far too intimate for a professional milestone, before her hand ghosted over the man's cufflink, lingering just a second too long. It was a silence that screamed louder than any confession, a secret suspended in the air, waiting to shatter their perfect suburban facade. If the quiet unraveling of a marriage speaks to the hidden parts of your own heart, stay with me. There are truths hidden in the shadows of this city that we have yet to uncover, and if you want to see where the pieces fall, don't look away. The wind off Lake Michigan was sharp enough to cut through the wool of Daniel's coat, but the chill he felt had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse ballroom, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand, watching the reflection of the room behind him. It was the annual gala for Vanguard Holdings, the real estate conglomerate where his wife, Olivia, had recently been named VP of Marketing. The room smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and ambition. Daniel, an architect who preferred the quiet dust of a drafting table to the polished gleam of social climbing, felt entirely invisible. He wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching her. Olivia was standing near the center of the room, wearing a backless emerald gown that Daniel had never seen before. She looked radiant, dangerous, and utterly detached from the life they shared in their quiet suburb. She wasn't smiling at the camera flashing nearby. She was smiling at Adrian Vance, the CEO, a man who wore power like a second skin. Daniel watched the reflection in the glass as Adrian leaned in close to Olivia. Too close. In a crowded room, there is a professional distance maintained between colleagues, a bubble of personal space that dictates propriety. Adrian had pierced that bubble hours ago. He whispered something into Olivia's ear, and Daniel saw his wife's shoulders relax, her head tilting back slightly, exposing the line of her throat in a gesture of submissive intimacy. It was a small thing. To anyone else, it was just a boss congratulating a subordinate. But Daniel knew Olivia. He knew the way she guarded her personal space, the way she stiffened when strangers got too close. With Adrian, she was fluid, magnetic. Daniel took a sip of the scotch. It tasted like ash. He turned around, deciding to break the tableau. He navigated through the sea of tuxedos and designer dresses, the hum of conversation dulling his senses. As he approached them, he saw Olivia's hand resting on Adrian's forearm. She was laughing, a genuine, throaty laugh he hadn't heard in their own home for months. "Olivia," Daniel said, his voice level. She flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny tightening of her jaw, but he saw it. She turned to him, the light in her eyes dimming instantly as they landed on her husband. "Daniel," she said, her tone shifting from warm to managing. "I didn't see you there. Have you met Adrian properly?" "We've met," Daniel said, extending a hand to the man who was currently destroying his marriage. Adrian's grip was firm, his smile practiced and predatory. "The architect, right? Olivia tells me you do residential work. Quaint." "It pays the bills," Daniel said, refusing to take the bait. He looked at his wife. "Liv, it's getting late. You have that early flight to Boston tomorrow. We should probably head out." The silence that followed was heavy. Olivia didn't look at her watch. She looked at Adrian. It was a split-second glance, a check-in for permission. "Actually, Daniel," Olivia said, her voice dropping an octave, the business voice she used on difficult clients. Adrian and I need to go over the final strategy for the merger announcement. It's going to be a late night. You should go ahead. It's Friday night, Olivia. It's midnight. The market doesn't sleep, Daniel, Adrian interjected, his voice smooth, patronizing. I'm sure you understand. Some of us have empires to run. Daniel looked at his wife. He waited for her to defend him, to defend them. He waited for her to step away from the man who was openly mocking her husband. Instead, Olivia sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. Please, Daniel, don't make a scene, just go home. I'll Uber later. She turned her back on him. She turned back to Adrian, who offered her a fresh glass of champagne. The circle closed, physically shutting Daniel out. Daniel stood there for a long moment, the realization settling in his chest like wet concrete. It wasn't just an affair, it was a demotion. He wasn't her partner anymore. He was an inconvenience. He placed his glass on a passing waiter's tray. Don't wait up, he whispered to no one, and walked toward the elevator. The descent to the lobby felt like falling. The house was silent save for the rhythmic humming of the refrigerator. It was 4:17 a.m. Daniel had not slept. He sat at the kitchen island, the cold quartz countertop pressing against his forearms, staring at the glowing screen of the family iPad. Olivia had forgotten to unlink her cloud account after the last update. It was a careless mistake for someone who prided herself on precision, but perhaps arrogance made people sloppy. The messages had started flooding in around 2:15 a.m. They weren't from the office, and they were from AV. You were incredible tonight. He doesn't look at you the way I do. He looks at you like a wife. I look at you like an asset. And Olivia's reply, sent 3 minutes later, I'm staying. I'm tired of playing the part of the good suburban wife. I want what you have. Daniel read the lines over and over until the words blurred. There was no ambiguity. No, it's not what it looks like. It was a transaction. She was trading their history for Adrian's future. The sound of the garage door opening cut through the silence like a gunshot. Daniel didn't move. He listened to the heavy thud of the door connecting the garage to the mudroom. He heard the click of heels on the hardwood, slow and tired. Olivia walked into the kitchen, startled to see him sitting in the dark. She was still wearing the emerald dress, but it was wrinkled now. Her hair, perfect hours ago, was loose and tangled. She smelled of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and tobacco. Adrian's scent. Daniel! She blinked, her hand instinctively going to her throat. What are you doing up? I told you I'd be late. You told me you were working, Daniel said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. He didn't recognize it. I was, she snapped, defensive immediately. She walked to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water, turning her back to him. The merger details took all night. God, I'm exhausted. Don't start with the jealous husband routine, please. I can't handle it right now. I'm not jealous, Liv. I'm clarity. Daniel slid the iPad across the island. It spun slowly, coming to rest near her hand. Olivia froze. She stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the sharp angles of her face. For a moment, Daniel hoped she would cry. He hoped she would crumble, apologize, say it was a mistake, say she was drunk. He wanted her to fight for them. Instead, she straightened her spine. She took a long sip of water, then set the bottle down with a deliberate clack. When she turned to face him, her eyes were dry. So, she said, now you know. Is that it? Daniel stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. 5 years, Olivia. Is that all you have to say? What do you want me to say, Daniel? That I'm sorry? She let out a short, humorless laugh. I could say it, but it wouldn't be true. I've been suffocating in this house, in this life, with you. The cruelty of it took the air out of his lungs. I gave you everything I had. That's the problem. Olivia stepped closer, her expression hardening into something unrecognizable. Everything you have isn't enough anymore. Look at you, Daniel. You're happy building safe little houses for safe little families. You're content. It's boring. And Adrian isn't? Adrian is a titan, she said, the admiration in her voice twisting like a knife in Daniel's gut. He challenges me. He pushes me. When I'm with him, I feel powerful. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm settling. He's using you, Olivia. You're just a conquest. Maybe, she shrugged, looking down at her diamond wedding ring, the one Daniel had saved for 2 years to buy. But at least with him, I'm standing at the top of the world. I'd rather be used by a king than worshipped by a peasant. The room went dead silent. The insult hung in the air, absolute and final. Choose, Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper. Right now. You stay here. We go to counseling. We try to fix this hell you've made. Or you walk out that door, and you don't come back. Olivia didn't hesitate. She didn't even look at the photos of them on the fridge. I have a meeting at 9, she said coldly. I need to shower. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his, cold and indifferent. She headed toward the master bedroom, the room they shared, to pack a bag. She had made her choice. She didn't choose the marriage. She chose the boss. Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, the sun beginning to rise over a life that no longer existed. The sound of the shower running upstairs was a dull roar, a white noise that filled the spaces between Daniel's thoughts. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. He could imagine her up there, steaming away the guilt, scrubbing off the tension of the confrontation, preparing to step back into her suit, her armor, her life with Adrian. She expected him to be there when she came down. She expected a fight, or perhaps pleading. She expected him to play the role of the scorned husband, desperate for closure. He would give her nothing. Daniel moved into the study. The room was cold, smelling of old paper and the cedar of his drafting pencils. He sat at his desk and booted up his laptop. His movements were mechanical, devoid of tremors. He didn't feel sadness anymore. He felt a strange, icy clarity. It was the feeling of a structure that had been condemned. There was no point in painting the walls when the foundation was rotten. The only option was demolition. He accessed their joint bank accounts. With a few keystrokes, he transferred exactly half of the savings into his personal account. Not a penny more, not a penny less. He left the house equity, the furniture, the car lease, all of it. It was the price of admission for his new life. Next, the printer hummed to life. He printed a standard separation agreement he had downloaded, a temporary measure until lawyers could get involved, but legally binding enough to make a statement. He signed it with a steady hand. The pen didn't shake. He walked back into the kitchen. The house was beginning to brighten with the gray morning light of Chicago. He placed the document on the granite island, right next to the fruit bowl Olivia had arranged yesterday. On top of the paper, he placed 2 items. First, his house key. Second, his wedding band. The gold circle clinked softly against the stone, a final period at the end of a long sentence. He went to the guest room closet and pulled out a single leather duffel bag. He didn't pack clothes for a week. He packed for a departure. His passport, his laptop, his sketchbook, a few changes of clothes. He left the suits Olivia liked. He left the watch she had given him for their 3rd anniversary. He stripped himself of everything that carried her fingerprint. The shower upstairs turned off. The pipes groaned and settled. Daniel checked his watch. 6:15 a.m. She would spend 20 minutes on hair and makeup. He had time, but not much. He walked to the back door, his boots silent on the hardwood. He paused for 1 second, looking back at the living room. The throw pillows were perfectly arranged. The wedding photo on the mantel smiled back at him. 2 strangers who thought they knew what forever meant. It felt like looking at a museum exhibit of an extinct civilization. He didn't write a goodbye note. He didn't scream. He didn't break anything. To leave a note was to engage. To break something was to show he cared. Daniel opened the door and stepped out into the biting wind. The cold air rushed into his lungs, sharp and cleansing. He closed the door behind him, hearing the latch click. It was the loudest sound he had ever heard. He walked down the driveway to his modest sedan, threw the bag in the passenger seat, and started the engine. He didn't look up at the master bedroom window. He didn't check the rearview mirror as he backed out. As he turned onto the main road, his phone buzzed on the dashboard. Olivia calling. She must have come downstairs earlier than expected. She must have seen the ring. Daniel looked at the screen, watching the name flash. Olivia, the woman he had promised to die for. He reached over, pressed the power button, and held it down until the screen went black. He merged onto the freeway, heading not toward his office but toward the interstate limit. The city skyline rose ahead of him, indifferent and vast. Daniel drove straight through it, leaving the ghost of his marriage haunting a house he would never step foot in again. 3 years had passed since the morning the garage door closed on Daniel's sedan, and in that time, Olivia had learned that silence comes in different textures. There was the peaceful silence of the library Daniel used to love, and then there was the terrified silence of the penthouse she now shared with Adrian. They were dining at Le Monde, the most exclusive table in Chicago, perched high above the glittering city. To the onlookers whispering behind their menus, Olivia and Adrian were royalty. She was the vice president of marketing at Vanguard Holdings. He was the CEO. They were beautiful, wealthy, and successful. But under the table, Olivia's hands were trembling. "You're not listening, Adrian," she said softly, keeping her smile fixed for the public. "The Q3 projections are down 12%. We need to pivot the branding for the Riverfront project. It's too aggressive." Adrian didn't look up from his phone. He swirled his Pinot Noir with a lazy, rhythmic motion. "You worry too much, darling. That's why you have wrinkles starting around your eyes. Have you booked that appointment I suggested?" The comment was delivered with a smile, but it landed like a slap. Olivia stiffened. "I'm talking about the company, Adrian. About our company." "My company," he corrected, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, devoid of the heat that had seduced her 3 years ago. "You work for it. I own it. Don't confuse the hierarchy, Liv. It's unattractive." He signaled for the sommelier, snapping his fingers, a gesture Daniel would have found rude, but one Adrian performed with arrogant entitlement. As the young woman approached with the bottle, Adrian's demeanor shifted instantly. He turned on the charm, leaning back, his eyes raking over the server with a familiarity that made Olivia's stomach turn. "Excellent choice," Adrian purred to the waitress, ignoring his wife entirely. "You have an eye for quality." Perhaps you could show me the reserve list later. Olivia looked out the window. The city lights blurred. She remembered dinners with Daniel at the small Italian place on 4th Street. He used to listen to her talk about her day with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. He valued her mind. Adrian only valued her aesthetic. She had chosen this. She had called Daniel boring and safe. Now, living on the razor's edge of Adrian's approval, she would have given anything for a moment of safety. There are rumors, Olivia said, trying to regain control of the conversation as the waitress left. Market chatter about a West Coast firm, the Ethelgard Group. They're buying up the debt on our stalled projects. Adrian waved a hand dismissively. Vultures. They're nobodies. Probably some tech startup trying to play with the big boys. I'll crush them before lunch. They're not nobodies, Adrian. They're aggressive, and nobody knows who runs the firm. The CEO is a ghost. I don't care about ghosts, Adrian snapped, his patience evaporating. I care about image, and right now you look miserable. Fix your face, Olivia. The investors are watching. Olivia forced the corners of her mouth up. It was a muscle memory now, a reflex. She took a sip of wine to wash down the bitterness. Later that night, in the sprawling master bedroom that felt more like a showroom than a home, Olivia lay awake. Adrian was already asleep, his back turned to her, the heavy breathing of a man with no conscience filling the room. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and did something she had done every night for 3 years. She typed a name into the search bar. Daniel Hart. No results. No social media. No LinkedIn updates. No architectural awards. It was as if he had evaporated into the ether. The man who had loved her was gone, erased by her betrayal. She looked at the sleeping form of Adrian, the titan she had left her husband for. He mumbled something in his sleep and hogged the duvet. Olivia pulled her knees to her chest, shivering in the climate-controlled air. She was surrounded by millions of dollars of luxury, yet she had never been poorer. The notification bell on her phone dinged softly. A news alert. Breaking: Vanguard Holdings stock plummets as mystery buyer acquires 15% stake. Olivia stared at the screen. The golden cage was rattling. The air in the boardroom of Vanguard Holdings smelled of stale coffee and fear. It had been 2 years since the rumors started, and today, 5 years after Daniel had vanished, the rumors had solidified into a guillotine blade hanging over the table. Rain lashed against the 40-story windows, turning the Chicago skyline into a gray smear. Inside, the silence was broken only by the aggressive tapping of Adrian's pen against the mahogany table. He looked older. The charm that had once seduced Olivia was gone, replaced by the bloated, red-faced indignation of a man who had never been told no. They can't just demand a handover? Adrian spat, looking at the assembled board members. This is a hostile action. We have bylaws. We have defenses. We have nothing, Adrian. Elias, the chairman of the board, said quietly. He didn't look up from the dossier in front of him. The stock is trading at $12. It was $90 when you took over. You leveraged us to the hilt for that failed Dubai expansion, and now the debt notes have been called in. Olivia sat to Adrian's right, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt a cold sweat prickling her spine. She had spent the last 2 years doing damage control, spinning Adrian's manic decisions as visionary to the press, but the spin had run out. She looked at her husband, her boss, and saw not a titan, but a gambler who had lost the rent money. The Ethelgard Group, Olivia said, her voice steady despite her nerves. They've acquired 51% of the voting shares as of this morning. They aren't asking for a meeting, Adrian. They're summoning us. Who are they? Adrian slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses tremble. I've had investigators on this for 6 months. Shell companies nested in shell companies. Who is the damn architect of this takeover? We're about to find out, Elias said. Their legal team is downstairs. They said the owner is coming up personally to accept your resignation. I'm not resigning, Adrian hissed. I built this. You inherited it, Elias corrected sharply. And then you broke it. The intercom buzzed, a harsh, electronic sound that made everyone jump. Mr. Vance? The receptionist's voice came through, trembling slightly. The delegation from Aethelgard is here. They're coming up. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. She looked around the room. The glass walls, the expensive art, the empire she had sacrificed her marriage to be a part of. It felt fragile now, like papier-mâché about to dissolve in the rain. She thought of Daniel. He had been so steady, so safe. She had hated that safety. And now, staring into the abyss of bankruptcy and public humiliation, she realized that safety was the one thing money couldn't buy back. The elevator doors down the hall dinged. The sound echoed through the open, heavy oak doors of the boardroom. Heavy footsteps approached on the marble floor. Not the frantic scuffling of lawyers, but the measured, rhythmic stride of someone who owned the ground they walked on. Adrian stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, trying to summon the arrogance that had been his shield for so long. Let them come. I'll tear them apart. Olivia didn't stand. She couldn't. She felt a strange, heavy gravity pulling her down, an instinctual dread that warned her the world was about to tilt on its axis. 3 men in dark suits entered first. Lawyers carrying thick binders. They didn't speak. They simply moved to the side, clearing a path. Then the shadow fell across the threshold. A man stepped into the room. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Daniel's old car. His hair was cut shorter, sharper. He wore no glasses, and his posture was commanding, filling the doorway with a presence that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Olivia's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart stopped, then hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The face was older, harder, the jawline set in stone, the eyes cold as the winter lake outside. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a ghost. Gentlemen, the man said. His voice was deep, familiar, and terrifyingly calm. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked directly at Olivia. I believe you're sitting in my chair. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, heavier than the storm raging outside. It was a vacuum, sucking the air from Olivia's lungs. She stared at the man standing at the head of the table, her mind frantically trying to overlay the image of the husband she had discarded 5 years ago onto this stranger in the bespoke suit. The Daniel she remembered wore corduroy and smelled of sawdust. This man wore power like armor and smelled of cold rain and expensive distinctiveness. Who the hell are you? Adrian barked, breaking the silence. He stood up, puffing out his chest, trying to physically intimidate the intruder. Security! Get this man out of here! Daniel didn't blink. He didn't shout. He simply walked toward the chair Adrian was vacating, his movement fluid and inevitable. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Daniel said. His voice was a low baritone, stripped of any warmth. Security works for me now, as does the building, as do you, technically, until I sign your termination papers. Adrian froze. He looked from Daniel to the lawyers standing silently by the door. The lead attorney for Vanguard, Elias, nodded slowly, his face pale. "It's true, Adrian," Elias whispered. "The acquisition was finalized at 8 a.m. Ethelgard Group owns the controlling interest. This is Mr. Hart, the chairman." "Hart?" Adrian frowned, the name struggling to register. Then he looked at Olivia. He saw the color drained from her face, her hand covering her mouth. The connection snapped into place. "Wait!" Adrian let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. The husband, the little architect who ran away." He looked back at Daniel, a sneer forming on his lips. "This is a joke. You think you can just walk in here with some borrowed venture capital and scare me? I know you. You're a pushover. Olivia walked all over you." Daniel finally looked at Adrian. It wasn't a glare. It was a look of profound boredom, as if Adrian were a smudge on a blueprint that needed to be erased. "I didn't borrow the capital, Adrian. I built it," Daniel said calmly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, thick file folder. He tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped inches from Olivia's hands. "And I didn't come here to scare you. I came here to audit you." Olivia looked down at the folder. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely touch it. She looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes for the first time. She searched for anger, for hurt, for love, anything she could recognize. There was nothing. His eyes were like glass. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice cracking. You're Ethelgard?" "Mr. Hart," Daniel corrected her. He didn't raise his voice, but the correction was sharp as a scalpel. "Please, let's keep this professional, Mrs. Vance. We have a lot of red ink to cover." He walked around the table and stood behind the chairman's chair, Adrian's chair. Adrian was still standing, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. Daniel waited. He didn't shove Adrian aside. He simply occupied the space with such intensity that Adrian was forced to step back. Daniel sat down. He adjusted his cuffs, intertwined his fingers on the table, and surveyed the room. "Vanguard Holdings is bleeding," Daniel stated, addressing the board as if his ex-wife and her lover weren't standing there gaping at him. "Your debt-to-equity ratio is catastrophic. Your reputation is in tatters. And your leadership—" He paused, his gaze flickering briefly to Adrian. "Is incompetent." "You can't talk to me like that," Adrian shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. "I am the CEO." "Not anymore," Daniel said. He nodded to the lawyer on his left. The lawyer stepped forward and placed a document in front of Adrian. "Notice of immediate removal for cause, Mr. Vance. Gross negligence, embezzlement of company funds for personal use, and breach of fiduciary duty. Security will escort you out." "Embezzlement?" Olivia gasped. She looked at Adrian. "What is he talking about?" Adrian turned red. "Liv, don't listen to him. He's lying. He's just a jealous ex trying to—" "The numbers don't have feelings, Adrian," Daniel cut in. "And neither do I. Not anymore." Daniel turned his gaze to Olivia. For a second, the mask slipped, and she saw the depth of the coldness inside him. It wasn't that he hated her. It was that he had outgrown her. She was no longer the prize he couldn't keep. She was just a bad investment he was liquidating. "And as for you, Mrs. Vance," Daniel said softly, "we need to discuss your future, or lack thereof." The removal of Adrian Vance was not the clash of titans he had likely imagined in his own head. It was messy, loud, and deeply embarrassing. Two security guards, men Daniel had hired personally, men who didn't care about Adrian's tailored suit or his shouting, gripped him by the elbows. "You can't do this! I own this town!" Adrian screamed, his heels dragging on the plush carpet. "Olivia, tell him. Tell him who I am." Olivia didn't move. She stood by the window, her back turned to the man she had destroyed her marriage for. She heard the heavy oak doors slam shut, cutting off Adrian's profanities. The silence that rushed back into the room was ringing in her ears. The board members, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, gathered their papers and filed out quickly, murmuring deferential goodbyes to Mr. Hart. Within minutes, the room was empty, save for the new owner and the woman who used to be his wife. Daniel remained seated at the head of the table. He was reading a file, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. A new edition, Olivia noted. He looked distinguished, severe. "Sit down, Olivia," he said, without looking up. She hesitated, then took the seat to his right, the one Elias had vacated. It felt too close, and yet miles away. "Daniel," she started, her voice softening, pitching into that intimate register she used to use when she wanted him to skip work and stay in bed. I didn't know about the embezzlement. You have to believe me. Adrian kept the books locked. I was just doing the marketing." "I know," Daniel said, turning a page. "I've seen the logs. You weren't malicious, Olivia. You were just negligent. You were too busy enjoying the lifestyle to ask where the money was coming from." "He changed," she whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. This time, they were real. "He wasn't the man I thought he was. I made a mistake, Daniel. A terrible mistake." She reached out, her hand sliding across the polished mahogany, aiming for his forearm. It was a gamble, a test. Daniel didn't pull away. He simply stopped reading and looked at her hand, as if it were a foreign object contaminating a sterile field. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "We all make investments, Olivia. Some yield high returns. Some go bankrupt. You bet your equity on Adrian. You lost." "Is that all I was to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "An investment? We were married for 5 years, Daniel. Doesn't that mean anything? I know I hurt you. I know I broke your heart. But I'm still the same woman." "No," Daniel said, closing the file with a soft thud. "You're not. The Olivia I married was ambitious, yes, but she had integrity. She wouldn't have looked the other way while her partner looted a pension fund to buy a yacht. You didn't just choose another man, Olivia. You chose a different set of values." "I was lost," she pleaded. "I wanted to be seen. You were always so quiet. I thought you didn't care." "I was quiet because I was building a foundation for us," Daniel said. "But you didn't want a foundation. You wanted a stage." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he now owned a significant piece of. "Here is the situation," he said, his back to her. "Vanguard is dissolving. The brand is toxic. I'm folding the assets into Ethelgard. The marketing department is being redundant." Olivia's blood ran cold. "You're firing me?" "I'm restructuring," Daniel corrected. "However, given your unique position and the potential PR nightmare of a messy exit, I am prepared to offer you a choice." He turned around. The sun broke through the storm clouds, framing him in a halo of pale light. He looked untouchable. "You can resign voluntarily today. I'll give you a standard severance package. You walk away, and we never speak again." "Or?" she asked, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. "Or," Daniel continued, his voice devoid of mercy. You stay. You keep your title. But you report directly to me. You will work on the transition team to dismantle Adrian's legacy. You will undo everything you helped him build piece by piece. It will be grueling. It will be humiliating. And you will do it on a junior associate's salary until the debt is paid. He leaned against the windowsill, crossing his arms. You said you wanted to be with a powerful man, Olivia. You said you wanted a challenge. Well, here it is. Olivia stared at him. She realized then that he wasn't punishing her out of spite. He was testing her utility. To him, she was no longer a wife or a lover. She was just an employee who had performed poorly. Why? She whispered. Because I bought the company, Daniel said simply. And I hate waste. Olivia looked at the man sitting across from her, searching for the husband who used to leave love notes in her packed lunch. She didn't see him. She saw a CEO who had just offered her a lifeline, however cruel it might be. She took a breath, smoothing the skirt of her dress. Her mind was racing. If she stayed, even as a junior associate, even humiliated, she would be near him. She could show him she had changed. She could work her way back up, not just in the company, but in his heart. It was a romantic notion, the kind of movie ending she used to scoff at, but now desperately craved. I'll do it, Olivia said, her voice gaining strength. I'll stay. I'll work on the transition team. I don't care about the demotion, Daniel. I want to make things right. I want us to find a way to work together. She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. I can prove to you that I'm still the woman you married. Daniel watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming of the rain against the glass. Then he sighed, a sound of genuine fatigue. You haven't been listening, Olivia, Daniel said quietly. He reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a second envelope, sliding it across the table. It sat on top of the file he had shown her earlier. What is this? She asked. The severance package, Daniel replied. And your termination notice, effective immediately. Olivia blinked, confusion clouding her face. But you just gave me a choice. You said I could stay. I gave you a choice to see if you had learned anything, Daniel said, his voice devoid of malice, which made the truth hurt even more. If you had any dignity left, you would have taken the resignation and walked away. You would have realized that some bridges are burned beyond repair, but you didn't. You tried to negotiate. You tried to cling to a position you lost the right to hold. I'm trying to fight for us, Olivia cried, standing up. Doesn't that count for anything? We aren't a us, Olivia. We are a conflict of interest. Daniel stood up as well, buttoning his jacket. He looked at the room, the empire of glass and steel that Adrian had built and he had conquered. I bought this company because it was a good asset, not to play games with my ex-wife. I can't have you here. Every time I look at you, I don't see a junior associate. I see the woman who looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough. He tapped the envelope on the table. Take the money. It's generous. More than Adrian ever gave you. Go to New York. Go to London. Start over. But you can't do it here. Olivia looked down at the envelope. Her hands were trembling. The reality finally settled in. There was no twist. There was no second chance. She had gambled everything on a man who didn't love her, and in doing so, she had lost the man who did. Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. Do you hate me? Daniel paused. He looked at her one last time, his expression softening, not into love, but into pity. "No," he said. "I don't hate you. To hate you, I would have to still be invested in you. I just wish you the best." He turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Daniel, wait!" she called out, panic rising in her chest. "Where are you going?" He didn't stop. He didn't look back. "I have a meeting with the architects," he said, pushing the doors open. "We have a lot of rebuilding to do." The doors swung shut with a heavy, final thud. Olivia stood alone in the silence of the boardroom. Outside, the storm was breaking, thin shafts of sunlight piercing the clouds over Lake Michigan. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, then down at the envelope in her hands. She opened it. Inside was a check for a staggering amount and a single sheet of handwritten stationery. "Olivia, you once told me you wanted a life that wasn't boring. I hope you find it, but you can't find it with me." She sat down in the chair that wasn't hers, in the company that wasn't hers, and for the first time in 5 years, she wept. Not for the money, but for the quiet, steady love she had sold for it.